I think we should start the show this week with probably what is the biggest story out of college football, and that is what is emerging now as a breaking story about Michigan. And I think they're calling it sign stealing. I think that's what they're calling it. I don't have a lot of information on this in terms of everything that's gone down. I did see today that somebody did get fired. I think it was like some staffer got fired, but the gist of what I understand it, and anybody who's in the feed, and Brad, you can also tell me if I have some of these details wrong, but it sounds like Michigan was sending folks, staffers, to games that were happening across the country of teams that they felt could be potential playoff competitors, I think, or playoff opponents or something like that, to get an idea of what they were doing and to also look at the kind of signage that they were using to indicate the plays. And I think that we've seen some of these stories before, and I think winning in the margins is always going to happen in sports. Teams are always going to try to find a way to shift the competitive balance their way. But that's all that I know right now, and I think that's all that we know in general, right?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, so it's being portrayed as sign stealing, which is what is happening to some degree, among other things. But the big thing is the rule says you cannot send any member of your staff or your program to scout other games in person, or to scout any opponents on your schedule that season in person. And apparently there's speculation that they have violated that. One way out of it, I think it's a dumb rule. Let me say that, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But one way out of it, if the only people they have been scouting in person are potential playoff opponents, if they don't play on their schedule this year, they've done nothing wrong at that point in time. But some of the things that we have seen have indicated otherwise. There was a very interesting interview that maybe makes a little bit more sense now that happened at halftime of the Rutgers-Michigan game, where Greg Schiano made some comments about there's some things happening that shouldn't be happening or something along those lines. And at the time, I think it was a confusing comment. But as the story is unfolded, it's like maybe he picked up on something like that. And there's people too that are saying, man, Michigan, they seem to struggle like out the gates against everybody, but after the first few series, it's like all of a sudden they turn it on and it's totally different. So again, there's a lot of teams that start slow, and so I don't know if that's a clear indicator. But I'll say this: I think this is the kind of crap that happens when you're, one of the top teams, one of the top dogs. People want to take their shots and find ways to, I guess, knock you down a notch or two. And this is because this stuff is happening across the country. I guarantee you, at every level of football, this is happening. When I coached, we would send people at times to go watch other games. When I was serving my 1-game suspension for getting kicked out of a sophomore football game, I had to miss. I couldn't go to any game that following week. The sophomore varsity for nothing. I couldn't be there at all. And so I went and watched a game of the opponent that we were playing the next week. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, you trade film and stuff like that, but there's stuff you can see in person. It doesn't show up on film. You can see if a team is, they're no huddle, what kind of tempo do they use? How do they sub in different packages throughout the game? You can pick up on signs and stuff like that. But you can see body language in between plays and on the sideline, and kind of there's a lot you can take from viewing a game in person compared to when you watch film. And then there's a lot of gamesmanship that happens with film. Me and my dad were talking about it. He talked about the guy who coached at his high school back in the 70s. This was 8mm film, and they would run like on their, like a lot of teams do now on their extra point, they would run one of those like polecat formations. And then if you don't cover it properly, they'll try to run for the 2-point conversion. But if you cover it properly, then they come in and kick the extra point. Well, they were doing that back in the 70s, and he tried to cut it out of the film, and like literally cut it out of the film, splice it together, and he missed what he wasn't very precise, and so you could catch part of it. And I encountered that when I was coaching. We would trade film, and by the time I got done coaching, we were trading it online. There was no physical DVDs or VHS or any of that stuff, and we'd go through as we were scouting the film, and I noticed stuff like that. Like as the clip was starting, you would see what looked like the guys running in from the side, because a lot of teams do that, running in from the side to come in and kick the PAT. And it's like, wait a minute, like they chopped that part out. Or like as you're charting down in distance, 1st and 10, second and 3, whatever. All of a sudden, there's a down missing, and it's like, and they're 30 yards downfield, and it's like, what happened on that play?
You're
You
like, what happened here?
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, everybody's trying to gain an edge any way that they can. Um, I I understand it's the rules. It's a stupid rule. Um, but that being said, it for the NCAA, as inept and incompetent as they are, it seems like they pick the most irrelevant things to use their power to enforce. It's absurd, and maybe these types of things are the only things they really have any power to enforce anymore. I'm not sure.
Is it that irrelevant when the dynasty of the last 20 years in the New England Patriots was caught doing something similar? Obviously, they were using film, but they were trying to do the same thing. And many people would say that it has tarnished their legacy. So I guess what I want to know is there going to be the same kind of energy if this is on level with that? Because I hear what you're saying. The NCAA are clowns. And already earlier this year, we had the Jim Harbaugh buying a hamburger on the wrong credit card thing. So that's ridiculous. But I can understand them being a little bit more, I don't want to say iron fisted because we don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I can understand the public perception being a little bit worse because the energy that people had for this when it happened with other teams, especially in the NFL, was pretty high. So I think that people do regard this as something different. And the Astros too in the MLB playoffs. I mean, it's again, all falls under gamesmanship and trying to win in the margins. I personally think that that's what every team does all the time. It's just some of the teams get caught, some of them don't, and that's kind of what's happened here. But it does seem like the NCAA is trying to find things that are happening at Michigan, or they've been happening for a while, and now they're getting sloppy because they've been getting away with it. I don't know. That's just conjecture on my part.
Sure, and like you said, whether it once teams get caught, yeah, we can say, man, like that's definitely cheating. But again, like they're just the ones that got caught. Okay. Like
Yeah.
the Astros are just the ones that got caught. If you don't think other teams are doing other things to steal signs and communicate them to the batter, it's been happening forever with runners on second base, and that seems to be accepted uh, for the most part. And it's when you get electronics involved and everything else that people have an issue with it. And some of it's a byproduct of just the technology we have available these days that is really open Pandora's box as far as the possibilities to cheat in different ways that are really creative, honestly. But everybody's trying to find an edge. If you get caught, you get caught, right? And then there's consequences in most cases. So I don't have like a moral issue with it. I'm like, this is shame on Jim Harbaugh, shame on Michigan, whatever. I mean, the only way the NCAA finds out about this stuff is if it gets reported to them. They're not actively policing it. So, why isn't anybody reporting on Indiana doing this? You know what I mean?
Because
Because
Indiana sucks. That's
exactly,
why.
and that's what it is, man. And like how long has Alabama, some of the recruiting stuff that it seems like was coming up in the news for a long time, for years. Georgia recently, there's been controversies that all of a sudden become known that have probably been happening for years, and so once you're in the spotlight, once you're one of the top dogs, people are going to find any way they can to try to take you down. And I just think that's what's happening here.
Conspiracy theories all around. So we'll have to see what happens with this because, like I said, there hasn't really been much movement. This just broke. I think it was yesterday that it broke and haven't seen a whole lot. I mean, Michigan, some people would say they haven't played anybody. And I guess in some ways you could say that that's a valid argument. But also, I think one of the things that happens, and let me know what you think about this. Every single year it comes up, people say, like, who scheduled this schedule? Well, many times these schedules are made so far in advance. Like, you and I can go look at who Michigan or who Virginia Tech is playing in like 2028, 2030. Like, they have these things scheduled out so far in advance. And the conference games then get doled out each particular year. And I don't know how much the teams or the universities have to do with that. I think it just sort of happens. So the big matchups, the out of conference matchups, a lot of times the players that are playing on the team now, they weren't even in high school when some of these matchups were contractually put down on paper. And so I think it's sometimes unfair to say, like, they don't play anybody. Well, it is what it is. Like, the university makes these, the contracts are made. It's like, it's just kind of what it is. And you have to play who you play. And I think that the big factor for Michigan, in my opinion, is that they haven't looked bad yet. I mean, they struggled a little bit against Bowling Green in the first game. But other than that, they have been excellent. And I think they're a really good football team. So unless this whole thing has been happening for so long and is so rampant that it clouds every single thing that they have had in terms of success, I just don't see how this is going to tip the scales in any way when Kirby Smart is now probably like, okay, let's stop sending people to games because Michigan got caught.